TILDA, a solo female vocal library centered around the core concept of primal sounds and pure vocal expressiveness. Everything from basic vowel sounds of R's and U's through to consonant extensions, murmurations, and pseudo-language phrasing, as well as turns. Each vowel sound got its own unique legato transition so that we have any R or U or sound accompanied with its actual natural legato transition, adding a depth of realism to this entire collection. This library comes with a wild card in the form of being able to stack sounds together to create a choral sound and then throw the entire sound into the echelons of the heavens with the goddesses themselves and create an octave doubling below the root notes of the notes you are triggering. This creates a huge, ethereal, otherworldly, celestial sound that I just absolutely love. You would have heard it in the opening demo, and it is a core part of the madness that builds up to the overall experience with this library. So if we take a look at the interface here, we can see that it's effectively the same overlay structure as we're building into our instruments. However, every articulation set, there are still 10 here, has 4 individual steps within it. So we can now think of these as articulation rows. Every single step will be moved through in a cyclic fashion unless you lock one of these positions in. We'll get stuck into that in a moment, but ultimately it means that we take these 10 articulations or key switches and we turn them into 40 by using our step sequencing. And because there are just so many sounds on offer across this instrument and across the entire overlay threshold functionality, it means that we get access to a plethora of different sound sets and combinations. Really, the only limit is what you can dream up in your own mind. If we switch to key switching, this will lock the first articulation row for us, which is currently set to a series of R variations. So we've got Ma, La, Ya, and then Ma again. If I was just to play right now, it will move through each individual step in the sequence. Let's take a listen to that. La, ma, ya, ma, ya. Awesome. If I wanted to lock into one of those positions and just keep the same sound every time on the re-trigger, I can either use the lock button at the top, which locks that position for good until you unlock it. So now we'll be locked just to the first step. Ma, ma, ma. However, we can also use some key switches at the top of our 88 key keyboard to temporarily lock these positions. So if I press the A note here, either on the key bed or on my actual keyboard, I'll lock the first position. As soon as I let go of that key, it becomes unlocked again. So it allows us to have a temporary hold on that particular articulation during a phrase, and then we can release it and continue on without having to use the clunky setting of turning off and on an articulation. We can also lock in a position and use the temporary override function to temporarily switch to position 4, for example. And then as soon as we let go, it will snap back to the locked position 1. With that unlocked, we'll of course move through each cycle in turn. Additional functionality that also links into this section is found in the Legato section of the interface. And we have Legato velocity and Legato position. These allow you to lock the velocity of your performance to the very first note in your legato phrase, all the time you are playing in legato, of course. So if you started a phrase on a velocity of 60, then as you play through your phrase, no matter how hard or soft those notes are, you will get 60 as an output of your velocity. This becomes incredibly useful when you have a very complicated overlay structure and you're moving between lots of different sounds all the time, but you need the legato sound of R, for instance, because you've chosen ma as the start note, and you want the remainder of the phrase to stay with the R legato sounds, to be as natural and realistic as possible. That becomes important. Lock position for legato is the same thing, but now when we play a phrase, when we start legato phrasing, it will stick to whatever step in the sequence it is on, and it will play the entire legato phrase on that step of the sequence until you release it, and then it will move to the next step, locked or not. So we can turn these both on, and you'll see when I play, if I fully let go of the note and press the next note, I'll get a new velocity and I'll get a new position. However, now I'll play a full phrase, all legato, and it will keep me to position 4. Very powerful functionality indeed. Okay, let's move on to some other sound sets. So we've heard the ma, let's lock into position 2, which is now centered around sounds. Awesome. Okay, the third position is centered around sounds, and there are many more on offer than the ones we have selected here. These are just some of the core ones. Very cool. Okay, and then we'll go back to the first one and lock to position 1 and change this to the humming, the sound. So as I'm locked to 1, I won't move on from the first position, which is currently locked to I really love that one. It's very delicate and just very raw. It sounds very human. Okay, as we move through the other sound sets, we start getting into the more interesting and nuanced sounds. So if we go to hawa, for instance. Hawa, 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 hawa. And there's a whole series of variations based on those. If we unlock position 1 and move through to this key switch here. Very cool. When you turn off true legato, we get access to chords, of course, across this entire library. And for these, it becomes very chaotic and cool. I really like this sound. Okay, so this library also has something of a wildcard built into it that really takes this library and invokes a sense of godlike power and otherworldly celestial vibes. And that is our overlay stacking and our octave doubling. Now, the overlay stacking allows us, when we're in overlaying mode, as opposed to being able to set a grid that will allow only one articulation row at a time, when we engage stacking, we can put a series of articulations on top of each other. So if we were to do this, for example, and perhaps turn this back to an R sound, we now get a stack of the first 4 articulations. Which is a very cool sound. It's like a choral sound of primal, tribal energy. I love it. If you have legato turned on, this will still function, of course. And it really sounds lovely as chords. But this library really takes a leap into the heavens when you turn on the octave doubling. What we get here is the entire instrument plus a pitch shifted octave below everything you're doing. So it becomes a sound design engine and a complete powerhouse for creating huge, ethereal, otherworldly sounds. Character and energy in every single note there. I love it so much. The third and final option on this particular section is the quick start, which takes every L, M, N, W, and Y sound and takes away that initial start of the performance where it elongates the beginning of the phrase and it brings it right down to the start of the consonant sound, just to tighten up those sounds. You, of course, do lose a little bit of the natural realism of the performance, but it is sometimes necessary to tap straight into that sound in your choral movements, perhaps, if you just want that powerful initial punch of every single vowel. So if we turn this on, these chords will sound more punchy. Statements. Okay, let's turn all of this off, get back to our true legato settings, and move on to listening to the condenser, ribbon, and dynamic. So, of course, these three mics, which can be used independently and isolated individually, will give you the sound of that mic quality. So condensers will be bright and light and airy with some nice presence in the top end. Ribbons will be warmer and muddier, and dynamics will be more compressed and also warmer and muddier. Let's take a listen to these variations. Now the ribbon. This is very nice and warm, sits well in a mix, of course. And then the dynamics. A nice, well compressed and dynamic sound. If we move to the condenser again, this is probably the 99% use case scenario because it's bright, it's airy, and it's what you would normally hear on a vocal mic most of the time. We of course have our standard legato functionality, which will move between either adaptive speed or velocity, where we can move between fast and slow variations based entirely on your input. So whether or not you're playing over a certain speed or hitting the keys over a certain velocity, the choice is yours. We can also fix this to fast and slow. So if you know you're dealing with only fast phrasing, or if you're dealing with more lyrical, you get that more pronounced and lyrical slurred transition. Okay, let's move through to the effects. And on here is our standard stereo delay and reverb with a series of convolutions to choose from. If you want to get something more subtle and something that sounds perhaps more natural to the voice, then maybe choose the wooden room, turning off the delay, and this will give you a very natural, very raw sound of just the performer. And of course, if we're going to go really crazy with this and perhaps choose our Invoke the Goddess preset here where we get all of our overlay stackings, and in the effects we get the stereo delay and reverb on, set to superverb. We get this sound that is just larger than life. Such a powerful library and really beautifully performed. Okay, so just briefly then, the key switching functionality. Of course, we always try to lean heavily on the overlay functionality, but the key switching is still there for everyone that requires it. We have standardized key switching above the main range of the instrument itself. And if we're in key switching mode, then these will simply cycle through those key switches, because ultimately everything is on all the time in this library. We're moving through chunks of overlay threshold. That's basically how that functions. If we're in overlaying mode, then this will still move through one at a time, though we can manually set any threshold settings we want. And then if we're in overlay stacking mode, we will get a stack of overlays depending on how hard we hit the note. Everything below 60 will turn the row on, and everything above 60 will turn the row off again. This is also true of anything else that is a key switch. So the overlay stacking button itself gets a key switch that is up here. And if we hit anything below 60, it will turn it on, of course. Anything above will turn it off and turn it to simple overlaying, where we can set a threshold without the stacking. And finally, on the lower C note here, we get some breaths, some inhalations. So if we need that sound of a quick breath being taken between phrasing to add more realism, we can dial it into taste with this key switch here. So we've got a nice inhalation of breath there that we can use in the midst of a phrase. Okay, that has been an in-depth look at TILDA, the Primal solo female voice. Head to insanitysamples.com for more information and demos. Thanks for watching.